As Cyan and his companions traveled toward the academy, the atmosphere in the carriage was relatively peaceful. Emily, sitting close to Cyan, was brimming with joy. Her happiness was so evident that Cyan couldn't help but ask, "You're really that happy, Emily?" Emily beamed, her smile lighting up her face as she replied, "Yes, because I get to serve you again, my lord." Sitting quietly beside her, Nana remained silent, lost in her own thoughts. Cyan gave a casual nod. "Right." Emily, still excited, then remembered something and asked, "You mentioned before that maids aren't allowed in the academy, right?" Cyan crossed his arms and replied confidently, "I think the principal will make a special exception for me." When they arrived at the academy, Cyan wasted no time and headed straight for the principal's office. However, the principal greeted him with a firm stance, immediately saying, "Absolutely not. I won't allow it." Cyan folded his arms behind his back, maintaining a calm demeanor. "I'll make sure no one notices her. Please permit it." The principal raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Tell me, Cyan, why would I make an exception for you?" A bead of sweat trickled down Cyan's face as he replied, "I won't skip any lessons from now on." The principal's patience snapped. His fist slammed against the table as he scolded. "That should go without saying, even under normal circumstances. And 2 maids? Not just one." The principal's tone shifted as he leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Tell me, Cyan, are these 2 maids somehow connected to the Banquet of Blood? I don't assume you're asking for such a special favor without a serious reason." Cyan remained composed, his arms still crossed behind his back. He looked at the principal casually and asked, "And if it's not for a stupid reason, then what?" The principal, growing more curious and frustrated, demanded, "Just tell me." With a sly smile, Cyan raised a finger to his face. "I'll tell you, if you grant me permission first." The principal turned away, rubbing his chin in thought. Finally, he sighed in exasperation. "Whatever. Do as you wish. You'll probably do it even if I reject it." Cyan's expression shifted to a more serious tone. "It's difficult for me to explain it right now, but I'll tell you one thing with certainty. I wasn't the one behind the Banquet of Blood. Isn't that what you wanted to hear all along?" The principal's eyes narrowed, focusing intently on Cyan. "Are you certain?" Cyan's eyes widened slightly, and his tone turned more annoyed. "What exactly are you implying? Just how do you see me that you'd assume that?" After a tense pause, the principal relented, shaking his head. "Just make sure you never skip your lessons again." As Cyan walked through the academy's hallway, hands in his pockets, he thought about the recent conversation with the principal, Kundal. He smirked slightly, reflecting, "That went well enough. I wonder how he'd react if he realized the real mastermind behind the Banquet of Blood was his own grandson." Cyan's mind wandered further, piecing together the puzzle. It couldn't have been Lionel himself. He's not that meticulous. Askell was the one pulling the strings, and Boris must have been the one to carry it out. That's how they always did things in my past life, too. His train of thought was interrupted when he noticed someone in the courtyard. There, doing push-ups with intense focus, was Seth. 1285, 1286, 1287. Seth counted aloud, sweat dripping from his brow. Cyan blinked, confused for a moment. "This guy again?" he thought. Just then, Seth noticed Cyan and called out enthusiastically, "Oh, you're here, buddy." He immediately stood up, gritting his teeth and flashing a determined smile. "Let's fight again, Cyan. It's time to see who's stronger now." Without a word, Cyan slipped into his room and shut the door behind him. Leaning against the door for a second, he sighed. Seth hasn't missed a single class in 2 years, and he's always looking for a fight, Cyan thought, mildly amused by his persistence. From outside, Seth's voice boomed again. "You must be busy, huh? Fine, let's fight next time, Cyan Vert." As Cyan walked further into his room, he felt his foot bump into something. Looking down, he saw Brian lying on the floor, unconscious, a strange purple liquid dripping from his mouth. Sweat instantly dripped from Cyan's face as he crouched down and checked him. Is he dead? Cyan wondered, panic briefly flashing in his mind. At that moment, Emily's cheerful voice called out, "Cyan, are you here?" Startled, Cyan quickly pointed to Brian and asked, What's wrong with him? Emily walked in, holding a plate of cookies that emitted a bizarre dark purple aura. Nana was beside her, also happily munching on the same cookies. Emily, chewing contentedly, responded, I'm not sure. He fell asleep after eating the cookies I made especially for you. Cyan's eyes widened as he glanced between the unconscious Brian and the strange cookies in Emily's hands. No wonder. Seeing Cyan's confused expression, Emily smiled innocently and asked, Do you want to try one? The cookies looked far from appetizing. Cyan could practically feel the dark energy radiating from them. No wonder Brian collapsed after eating those. He shook his head, thinking it best to avoid Emily's strange culinary creations for now. Cyan, pointing at the cookies Emily was still munching on, said sternly, Emily, don't ever cook something for Brian again. Emily's eyes narrowed, a mix of curiosity and irritation crossing her face. Why? She demanded. Cyan, exasperated, replied firmly, It's an order, just don't. Emily, pouting and still nibbling on her cookies, muttered, You're too harsh, Cyan. Ignoring her complaints, Cyan slumped onto the sofa, rubbing his temples and closing his eyes for a brief moment. He sighed deeply. I'm already worried about the future, he thought, exhaustion creeping into his voice. His thoughts were interrupted when he noticed an envelope on the table. Where did this letter come from? He asked. Emily, still sulking, replied, Brian received it, so I don't know. Cyan picked up the letter, tearing it open. It was from Lunav. But before he could read it further, a voice called out his name. Cyan, still holding the letter, turned to face the direction of the voice. How did you get here? He asked, surprised. Emily, startled, clutched the plate of cookies like she was about to throw it at whoever had entered. Who is it? Standing at the doorway, smiling warmly, was Lunav. How have you been, Cyan? She asked casually. Before he could respond, she added, I ran away from home. Cyan blinked, his mind racing with confusion as Lunav stood there nonchalantly. Meanwhile, deep in an unknown underground passage, two cloaked figures moved silently, their lamps casting faint shadows on the walls. One of them, a man, whispered, The guards from the Garum Association will be here soon. The other, a woman, replied confidently, Don't worry. I've already taken care of them. The man continued, his voice low and serious. Remember, this is the only way to stop Reigen's Rain Reaver. The woman, sounding amused, responded with a chuckle. Oh my, are you worried I'm going to feel guilty? The man glanced at her, curious. Well, she's your student after all. The woman's expression darkened slightly as she smirked. She was none other than Lewin's academy instructor, Nella Aronis. My student, she mused before adding, her tone wicked. I'm not so foolish that I'd feel pity for that monster. The man, satisfied, nodded. That's good for us. Nella adjusted her cloak, her smirk growing as she said, Then I'll head to the location. I'm sure our colleagues have reached Luna by now. The man bowed sincerely and said, Let there be glory to the Garum Kingdom. Nella, still smiling, nodded in return, her eyes gleaming with sinister intent. The scene shifted to Cyan and Lunav, who were sitting together in a small cafeteria. Lunav looked at Cyan and said, You were pretty aggressive when you dragged me out of your room. I didn't expect you to do that. Holding his teacup, Cyan asked curiously, There was a barrier spell on the dorm doors. How did you get past it? Lunav casually used ice magic from her hand and explained, I analyzed the barrier with my mana and canceled it with a spell. Pretty cool, right? Sweat dripped from Cyan's face as he thought, That's insanely powerful. She can just analyze and undo spells? That's more than just scanning. Lunav chuckled and asked, Did you read the letter I sent you? Cyan crossed his arms and replied, You showed up right as I was about to read it. Smiling, Lunav placed her hands around her face and said, I came because I couldn't wait for your response. Cyan's expression darkened as he asked, Did Reigens put you up to this? Lunav fell silent for a moment. Growing angrier, Cyan repeated, Was it Reigens who told you to contact me? Tell me now. Lunav, holding her cup and lowering her head, hesitated before responding, At first, yes. That was the reason, but not anymore. She continued, Whether you trust me or not is up to you. Cyan rested his head on his hands and replied, I don't trust people easily. What are your intentions? Looking into her teacup, Lunav said, there have been some strange things happening at the association. 2 dragons, who had ties to the association, suddenly disappeared in the Lewin region, and smugglers bringing items from overseas have been found dead. Cold corpses. She then looked up at Cyan with a slight smile and said, I had a hunch, but now I'm sure. You were involved with all of it. Cyan lowered his head, thinking to himself, I didn't know the dragons were connected to the association. He chuckled and said, All right, so, what are you planning to do now? Lunav casually told Cyan that she would die soon. Cyan was confused when she heard this. Lunav then said happily that Cyan had helped her before, but she knew about her body's condition. She remembered the days when she had been experimented on and said, I'm already broken beyond repair. As she stood up, Lunav held up her hand and counted on her fingers, saying, I think I have 3 years left. Thank you for your help. Cyan, feeling sad, responded, I don't believe that. Why are you so relaxed about it? Aren't you worried that you'll die soon? Lunav chuckled, closed her eyes, and happily replied, I wish I could feel something. Cyan thought to herself, what an annoying brat she is. He stood up and placed his hands on the table and looked down. Whatever, it's none of my business. Just go back. Lunav, still sitting, asked, Are you leaving? Cyan turned to leave and said, Yeah, I don't like getting involved in annoying situations. As Lunav said goodbye, she cheerfully told Cyan, All right, see you next time. Suddenly, Kiram appeared and asked Cyan, Where are your manners? Is it okay to leave her like that? Cyan replied, Yes, it's for the best. The Garam Association has been waiting for a while. As Cyan left, some guards in cloaks appeared. Lunav, closing her eyes, said to them, I thought I did a great job sneaking out. Why are you here so early? One of the men replied, Let's get going, Miss Lunav. Mr. Reigans is looking for you. Lunav looked at the cloaked man with curiosity. He asked her, What is it, Miss Lunav? She replied, It was always Victor who came to pick me up. Who are you, by the way? The cloaked man explained, Oh, Mr. Victor is busy today, so I'm here instead. We're from the 6th branch of security in the Garam Kingdom. Lunav chuckled and said, Liar! I don't know anyone named Victor. Suddenly, she used her wind ability and started to run away. Ugh, hurry! She's getting away, shouted the cloaked man. As Lunav ran, she wondered if they were extremists. Just then, someone appeared in front of her with a glowing hand full of mana. Thinking quickly, Lunav realized she needed to escape. The man placed his hand on her head and used his ability, Sleep Catch. Lunav was shocked and couldn't move at all. Once the ability took effect, she fell into a deep sleep. The man smiled and said, I didn't think it would be that easy. He removed his cloak, revealing that he was bald, and said, But we were also caught by her way too quickly. He then told the others, Take her to the carriage quickly. At that moment, Kiram sensed something and was startled. She told Cyan, It looks like they're fighting. Cyan wondered, Aren't they from the Garam Kingdom? The men placed Lunav in the carriage, and it began to move toward their destination. When they arrived, they found themselves at a church. One man said, Stand by here and guard the package. The others replied, Yes, sir. The bald man entered the church and spoke to someone, saying, I brought Lunav Rainreaver. Someone sitting in the front row responded, Well done. What a pitiful child. She has been experimented on her whole life, just to be used and thrown away in the end. Nella said, We'll use the child for a good cause. Lunav was in the carriage, unconscious, with her hands tied behind her back, so she couldn't escape. The guards by the carriage became flustered when they saw a red-black fog surrounding them. One man exclaimed, What is this fog? Another said, Wait, it can't be the mist. But before he could finish, his face was cut in half. Another guard, standing nearby, shouted, Marcel! In an instant, all the guards were sliced in half within seconds. One man, scared and sweating, said, What? What the hell is going on? Sweat dripped from his forehead as he pleaded, Stop! That's enough! At that moment, Cyan was sitting on top of the carriage, holding his Kiram dagger. A man on the ground was very frightened, and in an instant, Cyan killed him too. The man shouted before dying, which startled the bald man inside the church. He turned to look at the exit. Nella asked, "Are there other guests here?" The bald man, still facing the carriage, replied, "It seems someone has followed us here." Nella said, "Ah, an enemy." The bald man's name was revealed to be Ralph. Nella told Ralph, "Show them what happens when anyone tries to get in our way." Ralph, feeling angry, said, "Yes, I will go and silence them." Cyan stood over the dead bodies, wearing a cloak. Kiram remarked, "That was much easier than I expected." Cyan replied, "It's not over yet. The stronger guys are in the church." When Ralph came out of the church, a blue aura surrounded him. He said to Cyan, "Not bad for a kid like you. Did you come here all alone?" Cyan, wearing a mask, responded, "Doesn't seem that way for you, though." He thought to himself, he's like Lunav. Ralph clenched his fist and began running towards Cyan. As he got closer, Cyan realized, no, he's more unstable than her. Ralph told Cyan, "I don't need anyone's help to defeat a weakling like you." Just then, Nella came out of the church and asked Ralph, "Are you done?" She was surprised by what she saw. Ralph was sitting on the ground with his arms crossed, looking down. Seeing this, Nella said, "This is not what I expected." In that moment, Cyan punched Ralph in the face, knocking him unconscious. Cyan then asked her, "Are you the last one? Why did you want to take Luna?" Then Nella moved her hand in front of Cyan and used fire magic, creating a crystal fireball in her palm. She said, "Oh my, you won't be popular with the girls if you're too inquisitive." Before throwing the fireball at him, she added, "You should find out the answer to that yourself." Cyan watched her magic closely and thought, combining elements freely. His eyes widened as he realized she was definitely like Lunav. Nella then used her ability, Thunder Flame, sending flames swirling around her body and throwing them towards Cyan. As he dodged the flames, Cyan thought, "I have even more questions now." He pulled out his Kiram dagger. Nella was confused as she saw him deflect the fire with his dagger. Suddenly, Cyan got very close to her and said, "I got you." Seeing him so close, she shouted in disbelief, and sweat dripped down her face. In a panic, she used her ability, Air Leap, to dodge his attack. Cyan's strike hit the ground, causing it to shatter. While in the air, she thought, "This kid is very dangerous. I can't let him live." Gathering her mana into her hand, it formed a blue crystal. She used her ability, Charge Shot, and shot small ice darts towards Cyan. At that moment, Kiram flew in as fog and appeared behind her, saying, "Look here too." Nella was puzzled, thinking he's not alone. Just then, Kiram grabbed her, and she shouted, "Let me go." She used her mana and attacked towards Cyan, using all her might. But he dodged them and landed beside where her attack had hit. The ground shattered where her attack struck. Cyan observed everything and thought, "She sure has a lot of mana." Meanwhile, Nella was sitting on the ground, trying to free herself from Kiram's black fog. Gritting her teeth, she said, "Didn't you hear me?" Kiram, standing beside her, explained, "Stop struggling. No human can free themselves from those restraints." Cyan then stepped in front of her and asked, "Who ordered you to kidnap Lunav? How many more of you are there?" Nella lowered her head and replied, "What an interesting kid. You'll find out soon." One of her eyes was damaged, and blood dripped from her face as she smiled at Cyan. "We'll seek you out, so don't worry about who wanted to kidnap Lunav. See you in hell." Seeing her reaction, Kiram looked confused and said, "That reaction, she's from Heart Curb." Cyan explained, "It's an artifact that keeps the user's mana in their heart, which is why she can't circulate it throughout her body." Nella was startled to hear this. Kiram happily added, "I assume Lunav has something similar." Nella, still in shock, asked, "How did you guess all of that?" Cyan continued explaining, "The monstrous organization that carries out vile experiments in the Garam Association is called the Path of Evolution. Am I right?" Hearing this, Nella shouted, "Wait, who are you guys?" Cyan leaned closer to her and said, "You can find the answer to that yourself in hell." He placed his hand on her head, and Nella exclaimed, "What? This isn't right. Dying like this." Cyan then used his force and put his other hand where her heart was, causing her to cry out in pain. As he did this, he thought to himself, in my past life, I found an ancient text in a laboratory room of the Garum Kingdom. It described how to use an artifact called Heart Curb, how to control it, and the experiments related to it. It also explained how to eliminate it when its use fails. At that moment, Cyan pulled something out of Nella's heart. The item glowed in his hand. As he held it closely, he said, "Looks like it still works well." Kiram asked Cyan, "What are you going to use it for?" Cyan ordered her to get Lunav out of the carriage. Kiram shouted back, "No way. Why should I?" Cyan, angry, replied, "Do you want to be controlled too?" Reluctantly, Kiram brought Lunav out of the carriage and placed her on the ground, still silent and upset. Cyan then approached Lunav and said, "It's my first time trying this." While looking at the crystal-like ball, he added, "So I don't know if it will go well." He tightened his fists and shattered the crystal ball, then placed its power into Lunav's heart. He thought if Lunav has something like this in her heart too, then this should be able to destroy it. As Cyan transferred the crystal ball's power into Lunav's body, Kiram stood with her arms crossed, watching everything closely. Because of the crystal ball's power, Cyan's hand and Lunav's chest glowed with blue energy. Suddenly, Lunav opened her eyes. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. If you'd like to see more manhwa recaps like this, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. That way, you'll stay updated on all my future content. Until next time, take care.